Okay, good morning, everyone. Derek will be joining us in about 30 seconds. I just wanted to hop on very quickly to let you know that we have the chat room open and I will be here to answer any questions at any time that you have during the webinar. So do enjoy and hopefully we hear from you.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us. This is the 22nd webinar that we've done since March 20th, and we've had 5,000 unique viewers. Slide. We've had 5,000 unique viewers here, and you know it's been for everybody an extraordinary time, right? Just we've gotten through these 10, 11, 12 weeks, and I think for me personally, when this first started, nobody knew where this was going. So I just took things 24 hours, one day at a time. I read Luke 12:25 every morning, okay? And that went on for a few weeks. And then as things started to settle down, we got in a pattern. I think I was able to start planning, 1 week in advance, right? And now I think we feel comfortable. We're planning 1 month in advance, and now we're starting to think about things that we're doing next year. So I think that just been a journey for everybody, and for those of us who sort of really got into it, I think there was some real benefits that have come out of it. And so one of the things that was really interesting was that I had lots and lots of discussions with people, and really, really bright people. I mean, you meet smart people, keep quiet and listen, right? And I listened to what these people said. I've tried to take what they've said, and lots of them weren't in the apartment industry necessarily, but what they said, and I tried to turn it into something that could be apartment advice. Okay, so slide. So recently, CMHC came out with new underwriting guidelines. I'm going to cover that at the end of the session. And but let's go. Okay, slide. Let's go through the things that I sort of thought about when we first planned this webinar a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, we got to go back here. When we first planned this webinar a couple of weeks ago, I thought, well, let's come up with just 10 things that are important. But then as we started thinking of those 10 things, and Sally Turner and David Azakov and I put this webinar together, it came to more than 10 things. And some of those things were personal observations that we made. So I thought, let me just share some of those observations because I think they might be interesting to you, and you might have seen the same ones. Okay, so slide. So the first one is a very personal one. Because our office was closed and we've got about 5,000 square feet here, everybody was home, it was just easier for me to come to the office every day. And our office sits right on the QEW, in Halton region. So I look out of my office window and I'm looking at the highway. And the highway has been quite empty, right? That has changed dramatically in the last couple of weeks. But I also drive by the GO station parking lot every day and I count the cars. That's my own personal survey. I go by the GO station and I count the cars, and there have been somewhere between 20 and 30 cars there every day, usually around 25. Today there were 27. So I just drive by the GO station, circle around, count the cars, and that's my little survey. And then I watch the traffic every day on the street in front of me, on the highway in front of me, and it's not quite as busy as this, but it's getting busier. At 5 o'clock, there's a small traffic jam on the highway right in front, heading towards, heading west. So this is interesting. The GO station parking lot is empty, but the highway is getting full. Well, I think what that really means is that people don't want to take transit, and people aren't going to carpool either because they don't want to be near somebody else. So maybe we're going to have significant traffic jams and less and less people using transit. Okay, slide. So what's happened in the world was already happening. It's just got accelerated by COVID. And I think you've heard people say that, but let's look at it by asset class alone, right? So these are the asset classes that we're looking at, and as you go down the arrow there, the risk sort of goes up. So who hasn't had a lot of disturbance? Well, self-storage, industrial, and apartments, right? All of those asset classes have done well. When we first started this thought leadership series, we thought that a lot of people weren't going to pay their rents. That turned out to be really not true. April, May, and by the time June came around, nobody was even asking, what percent of rents do you think you're going to get collected and things like that. So the whole thing was very, very, it was a non-event, and it showed the strength of the apartment business. And what I say to people is that, apartments are not only recession proof, they're virus proof as well, right? So, but Office is it's in transition for sure. It's been difficult with retail, very difficult. Single family homes and condos, it's a little early to tell as to what's happened. CMHC's made some predictions, and hotel and hospitality have certainly had their challenges. So I think the way to say what happened is that whatever trend was happening before, so I think retail was on its way down, apartments were on their way up, those things have gotten accelerated, right? So we're apartment guys. Let's talk about the apartment industry. And so first thing we've realized with this environment that we're in is we've had to create a new leasing experience. But some of these things I think can get a little overblown when you talk about them and then when you actually go and do them. I have visited some rental apartment sites that are new buildings in lease up, talk to rental agents and things like that. So I think the good news is that we certainly have technology. It's been the savior of this time. I couldn't imagine this 20 years ago if we'd all had to stay home. Business would have to shut down. A lot of us kept going at a reasonably decent pace. So the good news is that we had technology before COVID. Apartment owners just didn't make as much use of it as they could. So in our experience, we found that people still want to come in for a tour, but these virtual tours are weeding out people, right? If it's not right for them, price and things like that. But here's what I'd say about virtual tours. You can rent some apartments that way, but it is not the be all and end all. It seems to me that we've just added one more step to the experience. That's my conclusion. We've added one more step to the experience. Virtual tours aren't the answer alone. You're still going to need to do physical tours and things like that. Okay, slides. So you got to think about resident profile, the resident selection criteria, and who you're going to approve, because we are going to see a little bit, I don't think a lot, we're going to see a little bit of disturbance at in the rental market, particularly at the high end of the market. So I asked this question: is someone who went bankrupt a high risk? And I think you maybe need to rethink your leasing, right? Things are still pretty good in leasing, but if the market starts getting softer, is someone who went bankrupt a good risk? Well, if they went bankrupt because they started to run a business and the business had a problem and now they've secured other employment or they've got other income, is that person really a big risk? Well, I think you might want to rethink that, because on a lot of people's checklists is if they've gone bankrupt, it's a red flag. Well, they've gone bankrupt for a reason other than bad spending debt and not paying their credit cards and things like that. Maybe that person is someone that you want to take as a renter. So rethink your acceptance criteria if the market gets softer. For sure, there's been all kinds of credit card scams and all out there. We're talking about common sense here, but think about your acceptance criteria, and maybe they were written in another time. And now the time is going to be different. Okay, number 4. I think this one's interesting. Pension funds are going to mark down their assets. So institutions are going to get appraisals and they're going to write off some of their assets, and some are going to drop more than the others, which means that they are now not going to be properly balanced and they're going to rebalance. Some might want to buy apartments, some might want to sell apartments, but I suspect that most institutions were underweighted in the apartment class anyways, and they're going to want to buy apartments, partly because apartments came through this period. We're certainly not through it but by a long shot, but apartments have done well, better than almost everybody expected, even with the legislation about evictions and things like that. People at the end of the day essentially paid their rent, and that was really good for the apartment business. Okay, number 5. I think this is a little bit of prediction. Acquisition managers are not going to make their bonuses this year. We're 6 months into the year and there have been probably very few transactions made, but it will be interesting to see what the institutions do. Will we have a bit of a buying spree coming out of this period? I suspect we might. I suspect we might, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Number 6, I got this from the real estate guy at Ernst & Young. It's kind of simple, but straightforward. Families should write down their assets if they're going to do an estate freeze. This would be a good time to do an estate freeze and to vend a lower value into the estate. This is part of your long-term tax planning strategy if you're an apartment owner, right? Number 7, non-apartment assets. The pain was born at the bottom of the market. And I think I haven't really heard anybody say this. I hope you find this interesting. We've spent, I spent the last 10 weeks making hundreds of phone calls across the board. And here's something that we consistently saw, right? This is for non-apartment assets. So apartments, if you had a 10-unit building or a 100-unit building or 1,000 units on a site, they all did pretty well. But in the other asset classes, non-apartment, this was an interesting trend that people saw. So if you had a tenant who had 25,000 square feet, so a large tenant, just didn't matter what they did, office, retail, industrial, 90% of the rents were collected. Okay. If you had a tenant who occupied 5 to 15,000 square feet, then 70% of the rents were collected. But if you had a resident who was 5,000, or a tenant who had less than 5,000 square feet, then less than, I think that number should be 50%. Sorry, less than 50% of the rents would be collected, and it could go as low as 30%. So it's an interesting phenomenon that the larger the tenant, the more likely they were to pay. So those people, with the different asset classes, had challenges, and small business got much more challenged here than larger businesses. So I'm going to give an analogy here that's not quite correct, but it's the one I can think of. I think the opening up of the economy is going to feel a little bit like the end of World War II. That's a crazy statement to make, but I've heard about, there was euphoria in the streets and people were dancing in the streets and things like that. It's not going to be exactly the same thing. But yesterday, the first appointment I had, I actually went to see my dentist. And I was actually happy to go see my dentist. How often does that happen? I got out of the house, I got something fixed up that I need to get fixed up. I was happy to see more than 2 or 3 people there and things like that. But I just think that people are going to be happy when this occurs. And virtually every conversation I've had with almost anyone has said, now Derek, I'm sitting on dry powder. I'm looking for bargains, right? Bring me some deals. Well, I'm really not sure that there are going to be any deals out there, okay? And there's certainly going to be, and there are going to be very few in the apartment sector, but we have picked up a number of listings during this 10-week period because we've been very active. Everybody stayed active, marketing, talking to people and things like that. And we're going to be bringing out probably 5 buildings for sale in the next little while. So so what I'm saying to you is, if you think you could be a seller, okay? And you're an apartment person, there hasn't been much of a change in value. I'll talk about that in a minute. I don't know if there's been any change in value in a lot of cases. We think that there's going to be a wave, kind of like the first wave in the morning for a surfer, right? You want to catch that wave now, while everyone is a little euphoric about coming out of this period. Everyone's got money, and we think that by the time this thing settles, by the fall, there's going to be some pain out there, and maybe there'll be a change in the marketplace. Okay. So a couple of things you need to start thinking about. Number thing, vacancies are increasing, and it's sort of predictable, which units will suffer. Nothing dramatic, nothing like any of the other asset classes. But what we're trying to do here with the work that we've done is we want to keep you ahead of the curve and not have a vacancy problem and let it get out of control, okay? So what I'm saying is, if you've got 500 units, okay, and you've got 2, 3, 4 empty, 5 empty, well, that's just normal operations, but you do not want to get to 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 empty, because it takes a long time to catch up. I've been leasing apartments all my life, and if you fall behind by 50 apartments out of 500, it's going to take you months to catch up, because you're going to have turnover along the way, okay? So we're trying to keep you ahead of the curve. Right now, the only real pain is at the top of the market. The $4 or $5 rents we're seeing that are some challenges. The other thing that's interesting to see, and you got to be very careful, is the condo market. The condo market is not a great indicator of rents in the rental market. Okay, you compare 1 month's worth of condos, 100 units that are rented, and then the next month you compare another 100, you say, well, there's been a 5% change in rent, a 5% reduction in rent. That may not be true. You're not comparing same store. Fair enough. When you look at one apartment building, you go back and look at it the next month and the next month, that same store. Be careful of looking at condo rents as the be all and end all. Also, the condo owner has no discipline, okay? He will just drop his rent because he's got 1 unit. And the other thing about a condo is that you need to learn to sell against the condominium. So if someone comes into my rental office and says, the guy across the road is $500 cheaper for an equivalent unit, right? I've got lots of reasons to argue against that. First thing I'm going to say is, if you move in there, don't unpack, because when he sells that condo, you've got to move, okay? That's not being run as an apartment building. There's 1 unit in there, or 2 units, or 100 units with different owners. They're not thinking like a long-term owner who's sunk millions of dollars into this building and plans on keeping it for the next 50 or 100 years versus a condo owner who's just going to flip it, right? So keep that in mind. You don't need to compete head to head with the condo market. Certainly, if you're looking at a lifestyle renter as opposed to just two roommates sharing a place for a year, then that guy just might go to condo. He doesn't care that there's no management in place, there's no pet policy in place. There's just a bunch of owners who have bought it as an investment and plan on flipping it, and they always sell it within less than a 5-year period. This is something else we think that's going to happen. We think that the federal government is probably going to introduce different programs to get the economy going. In 2008, 2009, we tore up too many good highways and repaved them. I think maybe hopefully we'll be a little smarter this time. And so we're gonna run 2 classes on affordable housing and how to become an affordable housing developer or property manager if you're interested in it. And they will be on June 23rd and June 25th. These are paid for events. They're run much like our apartment developer university, which is going on right now. But we think that the federal government, the provincial government, and the municipal government and CMHC have to work together to create a more streamlined process to build affordable housing. And we think that could be a really good opportunity for people who are interested in the apartment business, in the development and the ownership of affordable rental housing. So we're gonna get ahead of the curve on this and start giving you information on historical programs, how they work, the current programs, the need, and things like that. Okay, frontline staff. So we go back to leasing. So okay, this is not the scale because we don't have stock pictures yet of rental agent prospects standing far apart. But I think that the frontline staff, the conclusion that comes to the frontline staff is going to be much more important. And a lot of owners have bonused their staff. Some have given them just increases in their wage in an interim. They haven't said how long they're going to last for, but they've raised their rent, I think 20, 30% sometimes, because it's just a different environment out there. In talking to rental agents and visiting sites, high-level conclusion, younger people seem less fussed with this. They just come in, look at the apartment, keep their distance, and they don't seem to be, particularly fussed about it. They said that older people who come in, the baby boomer group, they're coming in masked up with gloves and things like that, and are generally more concerned. And that kind of makes sense. So you definitely have to adjust your leasing process. But I toured a building with an agent, and they were just careful. I was just careful, and it was a proper tour and really no problem. At one time there was a smaller room to sit in that was the closing room. I just said to the agent, look, let's just go sit in the lobby area as opposed to sitting in that closing room. But that was the only thing that I thought could be different. On the next one, everybody asks about cap rates. We're commercial real estate brokers. We sell apartments. That's what we do most of the time. Well, we have put a $25 million building under contract. We initially thought the timeframes were going to be much longer, and they were. But as we got to the COVID period, I think we've got a 30-day due diligence and a 30-day closing. I think on cap rates, this is a slide that we showed, before. But you can follow along, and you can see that this is just an average of cap rates. It's not the number that really matters that much, and we don't know sometimes what the cap rate's going to be. But you can just look at the spread between the 10-year Government of Canada and the cap rate. And I think the spread is going to be larger than it's been. So cap rates in the apartment business, I think there haven't been really enough transactions to say, and it's going to take a while to know that. I feel pretty strongly that the needle is not going to move on A-class property. So if you've got something at Yonge and Eglinton or on Robinson Street in Vancouver, or Spring Street in Halifax, then I think that the cap rate pre-COVID and post-COVID are probably going to be pretty similar. I think where the cap rate can move and likely will move is on C-quality products in C areas. Some of those buildings the price just got too high, and in COVID the rents were collected slower and people didn't pay attention to the resident profile, and I think now people will pay attention to the resident profile. It's going to take a while before we know what cap rates are, but they're going to be what they're going to be. But fortunately, there hasn't been much of a change. Next is a personal comment. I think that if you're inclined that way, and whether you are or not, but I think you might want to consider owning some precious metal, and that's just not related to COVID. I just think it's just a good policy to have some precious metal. Well, here's what I found out. I went to buy some more precious metal. I went to buy silver specifically, I wired the money into my silver broker's account, and they could not fill the order. And I think that was one of the first times in history that that's ever happened. It's not that they couldn't fill the order today. They couldn't fill it tomorrow, the next day, or the next day, or they couldn't give me a date. So it's interesting that people have pivoted over, because you could easily buy a silver or gold ETF, you know, online. It's paper, you just trade it. But here, when you ask for the actual shiny stuff, it couldn't be delivered. That was very interesting. Number 14. This is one of the bonuses that occurred during this time period, that people are always home, and I spent a lot of my time on the phone. And you know, one of the problems with you know, business is you call someone, they're not there, and you're playing telephone tag, et cetera, et cetera. Everybody was home. Everybody was answering the phone. Everybody was doing Zoom calls, and they were usually available very quickly if they were on another call. I'm booking no meetings out next week or next month or anything like that. It's within 24 hours and things like that. So so I think that was kind of one of the benefits of this. Also, Zoom has become a verb, right? Let's do a Zoom call. And the other thing too is, I don't know if you're sure what day of the week it is. I think today is Thursday, but it may not be. You can call people in different hours. I would call people on evenings, weekends. It didn't seem to matter. And you know, typically you stick between office hours when you're calling people, but people were open to chat. My average call was probably 45 minutes to an hour. In fact, I couldn't do as many calls I wanted because they were so long. But that was one of the things that came out of this thing. I think that was interesting. Student housing is a sector that we spend a fair bit of time in, have a keen interest in. And for those of you that are interested, there's a very, very good article written by a guy named Scott Galloway. His name is there at the bottom. And it was in an online newspaper called The Intelligencer. And he wrote about universities. And he's predicting that a handful of really elite universities are soon going to monopolize education. Look, Harvard is still going to be Harvard, but that university experience, I'm not saying it's changed forever. It's changed for 4 months. Maybe it's changed for, you know, for 6 months. But, you know, you can't have that university experience right now, but it'll be interesting to see. If you read the quote there, that's on the side of the page, I thought it was quite funny, you know, what he said and how he said it about university tuitions. So if Harvard costs $70,000 per year, you can probably bet that an online Harvard degree is also going to cost $70,000, you know, per year, right? Okay, next, number 16. You know, the conversion of hotels and office buildings, you know, may be on the rise. We've done the conversion of hotels and office buildings into, you know, into apartments. It's a tricky process to do, but with some buildings now maybe being made functionally obsolescent if a new world comes, right? And no one's sure it's going to come. I mean, things could go back to being pretty much the same they were. And that's the one thing I sort of have learned, is that you know, you just can't predict what's going on here. You go with it, you know, and you know, day to day, month to month, and listen to what smart people say, but nobody really knows. But there may be opportunities for renovations. Keep in mind, you need to be rewarded for renovations more than for new construction, because you can get hung up on a renovation. It can be much more expensive and take much longer than you think. Okay. Number 17. You know, I think that people were very transparent and very helpful during this period, even with their competitors. We were kind of all in this together, and people used numbers in discussions with me. They were just more transparent, more willing to share information, more willing to email you something, you know, and things like that. You know, there's still some baloney artists out there, and they were obvious. So many people who could not pay their rent went to their landlord and they made a deal. And they opened up their books and they said, look, here's my problem. You can't squeeze blood out of this home. And you know, a smart landlord worked out something with his tenant, because that tenant, if he left, he wasn't replacing him anyways, right? It was the right thing to do. But you know, I think there were, you know, a few people who could have paid their rent, who didn't pay their rent, and they have probably ruined their relationship with their landlord, and maybe some other relationships as well. And I call those kind of the baloney artists, right? This was a time to really work together and to help people, and just to be transparent with people. So that was one of the good things. So I thought about some of the great quotes I heard, you know, during this period. I attended a lot of webinars. Quite frankly, there were too many webinars of talking heads. 5 guys all agreeing with each other. We're never doing that kind of webinar here. Ours are going to be one guest focused, and that's what they've been in the 22 that we've run and the 5,000 people that we talked to. But this was a webinar in the US, and it was more about just, you know, stiff upper lip. This was a colonel in the US, I think it was the US Air Force, and he said this. He said, don't say to someone, how can I help you? It's too generic. He says, here's what I can do for you, and be specific, right? And he's right. So when I call people now, I don't have to say, how can I help you? Say, can I do this for you or send you this? Let me give you an analogy. I think he used it in his webinar. His name is Waldo Waldman. And I think he said for anybody in need, he'll talk to them for 15 minutes. Double check that on his webpage. Really a great guy. Let's say someone comes and stays at your house. And you say to them, you know, my house is your house. Go ahead, open up the fridge, open up the cupboards. Here's the liquor cabinet. Just go ahead and help yourself. Well, you know, nobody does that. They just wouldn't. But if you say to them, here's a delicious tray of cookies, or here's a glass of wine, then they'll be more likely to, you know, partake in it. So what he's saying is, be specific, you know, in how you help people. And I thought about that, and I've tried to do that more now. People, I'd say, well, look, if I can help you, please let me know. It's, I can do this. I'm going to send it to you. Can I do this for you? Okay, and things like that. This was a quote by John Love. John is one of the, you know, the premier real estate guys, you know, in Canada, and he's a pretty active guy and so on. But one of the pieces of advice he gave, which I shared with our staff, he said, once you've finished your work, reach across the virtual table and ask the other guy, how can I help you finish yours? Okay, and we've had some really good examples of teamwork in our company. We had to pivot from being, you know, full-on brokerage with hundreds of millions of dollars of transactions on the table that all froze. They're coming back. And we switched into becoming an education company and helping our clients and things like that. So I thought that was a really good quote, particularly for young people, to just say, how do I help someone here? And really great way to grow your career. The other thing we've realized is that, you know, there's going to be a lot of talented people out there, and we are going on a hiring spree for analysts and for brokers. And we would probably, if we're fortunate enough, we're going to hire 10 people in the next little while. Another great quote was, this is one of my clients, Marvin Katz, and he said to his grandfather said to him, it's never as good as it seems, and it's never as bad as it seems. So when it was really bad, you know what, it wasn't as bad as it was. And now that we think everything's going to be okay, it's probably not going to be as good as it was, right? So personally, when I first started here, I was doing everything on just a 24-hour basis, right? Staffing, work, everything was, you know, just changed. And then as time went on, 1 week at a time, now 6 months at a time, now I think I'm starting to think about next year and where we take the business. But it's never, so when you're in that moment of it being bad, it's not as bad as it seems. And when you're euphoric and you think it's a home run, it may not be as good as it seems. Okay, this is somebody that you all know, and I thought, you know, someone said to him, what's going to happen to the economy? His answer was, I don't know. Good answer. It's as accurate an answer that I heard on anything, and I think nobody really knows what's going on. And as time goes on, maybe things will become, you know, a little bit clearer. Okay, so one of the things we said that we would talk about was the CMHC financing. This seminar was initially precipitated by the changes in CMHC legislation, and this is their press release. You can find it online. But basically, what they're saying is that, you know, people saw their buildings as a storehouse of money, which they are, right? And CMHC insured money is the lowest cost of capital. So what people would do is, if they needed money for something, they could refinance their building using CMHC financing, and then they could use that for anything else. They could go build an office building, they could go buy a house, they could build a cottage. It didn't really matter, right? Now CMHC is saying, and this is the change, that you cannot take out your equity, okay, for shareholders, to be distributed to shareholders. It has to go back into the business. Whether you like it or not, it just sort of is what it is. So you can use your money to purchase, to construct, to do capital improvements, to pay off, a construction loan and things like that. But really what they're saying is, if you have equity in a building, then you've got to take that, you can take that equity out using CMHC, but you've got to use it for a similar use. So I think this is going to add a level of complexity, because now someone's going to have to monitor what happens to the funds, right? And it's probably going to be the lender. So the date of change was May 28th, and it's just for apartments 5 units and up. and it applies to loans that were not yet processed and new submissions. So if you were just pulling out equity for another reason, then you had to, then you just can't do that, right? So a borrower, so what happens? You submit an application already? Well, then you're just going to get your money back, and you're going to you're going to go to probably a conventional lender to get that same money, right? This restriction doesn't just apply to rentals only. It applies to standard rental housing, retirement, supportive, student housing, and single room occupancy. Basically, what they're saying is we don't want people taking their equity out and doing something else with it. This is a permanent measure, is what they're saying. So absent of any significant distortion, we expect this change to be permanent. So it looks like this is the case going forward. So it simply means that if you want to take equity out of your building, you got a $100 million building, you got a $20 million loan, and you go to take another $20 million out, CMHC finance it is something else, unless it's in, apartment real estate, you won't be able to take that money out. You can still go get, conventional financing. Yep. Next is, how will this be monitored? Well, the lenders are going to put in, some rules. So the bank that you go to will be responsible for following up with you to say, okay, we got you that extra $20 million. You said you were going to renovate your building. Then you've got to prove to us that you renovated the building. Again, it's I think it's something that has to happen, but you can expect more clarity on this as time goes on. But it will be a process now as to what you're doing, right? So the unintended consequence here is that apartment developers won't be as easily to get their profit out and move on to the next deal, because there's going to be more governance and things like that on it. Okay, that pretty much wraps up what we wanted to say today. We thank you for joining us. Just a couple of other events coming up. For those of you that have an interest in the commercial real estate brokerage industry, that's where we spend our time when we're not doing things like this. And we are seeing an uptick in listings coming into our company, and an uptick in just interest. The transactions haven't started yet, but one thing will lead to another. We always put our listings on our webpage, and we've got some more that are going to be going on there, and we co-broker with other brokers very, very, very gladly. That's our company culture. So if you are someone who are interested in the commercial real estate industry, please reach out to us. And after that session, we're going to have a second session with a little break in between on exactly how we do commercial real estate, if you're looking at joining an apartment boutique type firm that does that type of work. Affordable housing, I mentioned that already, and I really think that this is going to be part of what our future is going to be. And I'm hoping that this will also stimulate a discussion between municipalities, the province, the federal government, and CMHC. A coordinated approach is what's needed. And interestingly, in this whole COVID period, no real leader arose anywhere. Like during World War II, Churchill was the guy, and so on. But it was interesting that there was a lack of leadership here in this environment, and I think politically we haven't really seen anybody really step up to the plate. But I think someone does need to take ownership here of affordable housing and how we use these government work projects that are likely coming to do what's needed, as opposed to just who's shovel ready, let's go build that, let's go repave that highway or build that bridge and things like that. While we might need to repave highways and build bridges, there's an acute shortage of housing in Canada. We hope that this seminar will be a bit of a catalyst for it. During this whole period, we've been running Apartment Developer University. The results were really were extraordinary as to how twice as many people came to our online university as came to our live sessions that we did May and June every year for the last 9 years. But if you're interested in apartment development, go to our webpage. We have one more session tomorrow, the final one, on becoming a merchant apartment developer and intergenerational change, how you prepare your family to become, to create your estate and have your kids involved in your business. But all the recorded sessions are also available. So thanks very much for joining us. From time to time, we're going to do what we call these thought leadership webinars, of where we find topics that really nobody is talking about. And this session came about because of the suggestion of one of our clients who said, listen, I see that CMHC legislation is out. Why don't you comment on it, get ahead of it? And then we combine that with some of the 10 thoughts that some 10 or 20 thoughts that we've had during this period. So if there's a topic that you feel nobody else is talking about, that's the topic that we're interested in, and then putting that in the presentation to you. So thanks very much for joining us and for all your support during this period.